You thought waking up would set you free, that once you saw through the illusion, you'd be full of clarity, drive, maybe even joy. But instead, it's quiet, unbearably quiet. You're not sad, not exactly. You're not anxious, not in the way you used to be. But it feels like life unplugged itself, like someone turned down the volume on your soul and never turned it back up. You used to chase things, goals, success, meaning. Now you just stare at the ceiling. You wonder why you can't care anymore. Why even getting up feels like pretending. No one told you awakening could feel like this. But here you are. Not broken, not lost, but completely emptied. You didn't just wake up. A part of you died. The part that hustled to prove itself. The part that needed others to see, admire, validate. The part that lived in the eyes of the world, performing a version of you they could clap for. Gone. And what's left behind isn't a better you, at least not yet. It's silence. A kind of sacred void. Carl Jung called this in Antiodromia, when the psyche, after running to one extreme, suddenly swings to the other. You've spent your whole life striving. Now you feel still, but not the peaceful kind of still. The kind that feels like floating in space with no map, no gravity, no up or down. And you wonder, what's wrong with me? Why don't I feel inspired anymore? But let me tell you something most spiritual teachers won't say. You're not failing. You're not lazy. You're not stuck. You're shedding. Like the caterpillar that dissolves into goo inside the cocoon, completely losing its form before it can become a butterfly. And yeah, goo doesn't hustle. It doesn't write goals. It doesn't feel motivated. It just melts. This isn't the glamorous side of transformation. This is the grief of no longer being who you were, without yet knowing who you're becoming. But it's sacred. It's necessary. And it's dangerous if you misunderstand it. Because if you don't recognize this stage for what it is, you'll do one of two things. You'll either force yourself to go back to the old where ignite the ego's fire and call it ambition. Or you'll numb yourself, convince yourself that nothing matters, float through life calling it detachment. But really, it's despair dressed up in spiritual language. But what if neither is the answer? What if this space, this quiet, empty, aching space, isn't a mistake, but a doorway? Jung didn't promise that awakening would feel good. He said it would require the death of the old self so that something deeper, more authentic could emerge. The self, not the personality, not the ego, but the rooted, whole center inside you that doesn't chase meaning, it creates it. That is what's stirring now. You just haven't heard its voice yet because you're still grieving the one that died. So let's start there. Let's walk through this psychological wilderness with eyes wide open. Because the truth is, you're not lost. You're in between. And what comes next is not a return. It's a rebirth. You didn't lose your motivation. It dissolved. And not by accident. For most of your life, your drive came from one place, the ego. It wanted to prove, to win, to be seen. Not because that's wrong, but because that's how human development begins. We build an identity, a mask, a name tag that says, "This is me." Jung called this mask the persona necessary fiction. It helps us function in the world, fit in, play the game. But at some point, if you're lucky or broken enough to be forced into truth, something snaps. The mask slips. And what you see underneath isn't always light. Sometimes it's a vast, aching void. That's awakening. It's not fireworks. It's not enlightenment quotes on Instagram. It's standing in front of the mirror and realizing, I don't know who I am anymore. The ego didn't die. It just lost its map. Imagine a soldier trained for battle, and one day, the war ends. He wakes up. There's no more mission. He's alive, yes, but purposeless. Not because he failed, but because no one told him what peace would demand of him. You were trained by your environment, family, culture, ambition to live a certain way, to run toward goals with adrenaline, to fear stillness, to mistake speed for success. So when that framework collapses after awakening, of course you feel unmotivated, because the game you trained for is over, and no one told you what comes next. This is the paradox. You see the illusion, and you expect to feel free, but instead you feel numb. Not because you're broken, but because you're in between maps. That numbness isn't depression. It's what Jung would call the withdrawal of projections. All the meaning you used to project outward onto titles, relationships, goals pulled back. Now you're left facing yourself, raw, unfiltered, undefined. And here's where most people panic. They either sprint back to the old life, pretend the awakening didn't happen, or they collapse into cynicism, say, nothing matters, and call it wisdom. But both of those are escapes. Jung believed this middle space, the liminal void, is essential. He warned, if we skip it, if we rush to feel better, we miss the gold. Because this isn't the death of motivation. It's the transformation of it. The old fire, that was ego-driven, fueled by comparison, fear of failure, fear of being nothing. But the self, the deeper you, doesn't run on fear. It runs on alignment, truth, presence. And before that can emerge, everything false must fall apart. So if you feel like nothing moves you anymore, maybe it's not a failure of your will. Maybe it's your soul rejecting anything that isn't real. This is the collapse you never see coming. The hidden one, the one that doesn't make noise but changes everything. Because when you no longer want what the old you wanted, what then? Where do you go? Who do you become? That's the silence Jung spoke of. Not the absence of sound, but the space where the self begins whispering. But to hear it, you must first stop trying to fix yourself and learn how to listen differently. In the next step, we'll confront the fear that creeps in when you have no script left to follow, and what to do when the ego starts panicking inside the cocoon. Because the void doesn't last forever, but how you walk through it changes everything. Let's get one thing straight. You're not lazy. You're not failing. You're not wasting your potential. You're cocooning. But to the ego, that feels like death, because everything the ego was trained to do, move, perform, win, impress, is now irrelevant. There's no audience, no script, no reward. And so, it panics. It whispers, do something, prove you're still worthy, get back on the track. But the track is gone. And what's more terrifying so is the runner. This is where people lose themselves. Not because they're broken, but because no one told them that transformation looks like paralysis at first. Picture the caterpillar inside the cocoon. It doesn't just grow wings. It literally dissolves into biological goo. It loses all form, all identity. That's you, right now. And goo doesn't hustle. It doesn't wake up at 5 a.m. It doesn't journal its 10-year vision. It doesn't listen to motivational podcasts. It just melts. But here's the thing the world won't tell you. That goo phase, it's sacred. Jung would call it a psychic breakdown of structures, the internal collapse that makes space for something real to emerge. But in a hyper-productive culture, this silence gets diagnosed as laziness. Your stillness gets mistaken for failure. And worst of all, you start believing it. You tell yourself you should be doing more. You compare yourself to others who seem driven and clear. You force yourself to act, hoping to escape the void. But every time you push, it backfires. Your body says no. Your soul says no. And you start to think, maybe I'm just broken. You're not broken. You're between versions. And the ego can't stand that. Because the ego wants definition. It wants to say, this is who I am. This is what I do. But when you're in the cocoon, you can't say any of that. You're not a butterfly yet. You're no longer a caterpillar. You're just becoming. This is why the ego panics. It has nothing left to measure. No metric, no mirror, no applause. And this is why your nervous system feels confused. Because you're shedding a way of being, but haven't landed in the new one yet. And that in between, it's disorienting. Jung wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. But the same is true for you. The unlived life of your own self, your true self is calling now. And it won't emerge through hustle. It emerges through surrender. Not giving up, but letting go of what no longer fits. So if you're feeling like you can't explain yourself anymore, like nothing you say feels true, like everything you once believed in sounds foreign in your mouth, congratulations. You've entered the cocoon. And here's what no one tells you. You don't need to fix this. You need to stay long enough for the next version of you to take shape. But that takes courage. Because this is where the mind screams, do something. But the soul whispers, not yet. The ego sees stillness as death. But the self knows it's just the beginning. So let's not rush out of this. Let's understand the deeper danger that comes next. The spiritual trap that almost everyone falls into after awakening, and how it kills your return to self before it begins. This is the part most people miss. Not because they're weak, but because they're not prepared for how subtle the next trap is. It doesn't scream. It whispers, and it sounds a lot like wisdom. After the ego collapses, a strange idea slips in. Nothing matters. You feel disconnected from your old identity. So you tell yourself detachment is the goal. You say, I don't need purpose. I'm beyond desire. I'm just observing. But Jung would stop you right there. Because that's not detachment. That's disengagement dressed as insight. And it's dangerous. This is what he called spiritual bypassing, using spiritual language to avoid the raw, messy work of becoming whole. It's when you float above your pain instead of walking through it. When you dismiss your cravings, fears, and wounds instead of integrating them, you say, it's all just an illusion. But what you really mean is, I don't want to feel this anymore. That's not awakening. That's avoidance. And it leads to a new kind of prison. Not built from ego this time, but from emptiness misused. You stop showing up in your relationships. You lose interest in creating, serving, living, not because your soul is at peace, but because you've mistaken numbness for enlightenment. This isn't transcendence. It's withdrawal. Jung warned that if we deny the shadow, the parts of us that are wounded, angry, insecure, longing, we cut ourselves off from the very fuel that leads to transformation. He wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's the hard truth. The real path isn't up and out. It's down and in. So, if you find yourself saying, nothing matters, take a pause. Ask yourself, is this surrender? Or is this escape? Because here's the paradox. The self doesn't reject the world. It redefines your role in it. It doesn't say, give up. It says, let's begin again from truth this time. But to do that, you have to re-enter life. not as a persona, not as a performance, but as a presence, a quiet, grounded you who acts not because of expectation, but because of resonance. And that takes practice. Stoicism reminds us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. So if you say you're detached, prove it by staying calm when life doesn't go your way. If you say you don't chase status, show it by choosing what's right, not what's popular. If you say you're awakened, let's see how you handle the mundane, the annoying, the uncomfortable, because that's the test. Not how silent you are during meditation, but how present you are during chaos. So don't float away. Reintegrate. Come back into your body, into your values, into your daily life. Awakening doesn't excuse you from action. It refines the quality of your action. From proving to serving, from chasing to responding, from fear to clarity. And yes, this kind of clarity is quiet. It's not fireworks. It's not hype. It's a calm yes that rises from the gut. But before you can act from that space, you need one thing most people never think to rebuild after awakening: a new foundation. Because the fire is gone, yes, but something steadier is waiting underneath. Let's talk about that next. How to stop drifting and start anchoring again. You've seen through the illusion. You've watched the ego dissolve. And now, the question is quietly screaming, so, now what? This is the part where many people get stuck. Not because they don't want to move forward, but because they no longer know how. The old fuel, achievement, status, validation, is gone. But the new fuel? Still whispering. And in the silence, you wonder if you'll ever feel grounded again. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes a lifeline. You don't need perfect clarity. You need something stable to hold on to while your soul is still shape-shifting. And the Stoics give you exactly that. A way to act without certainty. To move without needing to feel ready. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You don't have to turn this into something grand. Just do the next right thing, right now." So instead of asking, "What is my life purpose?" start with this. What's true, right now, that I can actually control? That's your first anchor. No, you can't control when your passion will return. You can't force the self to speak louder, but you can choose to breathe slowly today. To wash the dishes with presence. To speak kindly even when you feel hollow. And that matters. The Stoics didn't care about peak experiences. They cared about how you show up in the ordinary. They asked, can you stay composed when insulted? Can you choose integrity when no one's watching? Can you find calm not because life is perfect, but because you decided to stay still? That's the kind of strength you build in this phase. And it starts with 3 Stoic questions you can ask yourself each morning. What's truly within my control today? Not in theory, in practice. Can you control your mood? Number, can you control your next action? Yes, that's where you start. What small act can honor my values regardless of how I feel? If you value truth, can you speak it? If you value kindness, can you show it even when drained? Am I acting from truth or from fear? This is the compass. Even if you're confused, you can feel the difference. And here's what happens when you live this way. Momentum returns. Not the adrenaline kind, but the quiet, sustainable kind. The kind that doesn't burn you out because it's not about proving anything. It's about honoring something deeper. Jung called this re-entering life with soul, not floating above it, but walking through it with new eyes. And it's messy at first. You won't feel motivated. You'll feel uncertain, exposed, raw. But every time you answer those 3 questions honestly, Every time you choose to act from your center instead of your fear, you build a new kind of identity, one that doesn't need external applause to feel alive. So no, you're not going back to the old fire. You're laying new coals now, slow burning, steady, aligned. And the beauty is, you don't have to see the whole path. You just need to walk it with your eyes open. In the next phase, we'll talk about what this new fuel really feels like, and how to tell if your soul has started to move again, even before your mind catches up. So, what does it look like when motivation returns? Because it will, but it won't come crashing through the door like it used to. It won't feel like fire in your chest or caffeine in your blood. It'll feel like a quiet yes, a subtle pull, like something inside you is gently leaning toward a direction you didn't plan, but deeply recognize. That's how the self moves. Not by force, but by resonance. The old motivation was built on adrenaline, hustle, deadlines, approval, fear of falling behind. And to be fair, it worked until it didn't. Until your soul said, "This is not sustainable." Carl Jung saw this coming. He warned that without inner alignment, our achievements would become our burdens. That chasing success without wholeness would eventually collapse under its own weight. The self, he said, doesn't operate from pressure. It responds to meaning. So how do you tell the difference? Here's a simple test. Ego motivation feels like anxiety. Self-motivation feels like readiness without explanation. You don't need to hype yourself up. You don't need a playlist or a vision board. You just feel drawn. And sometimes that draw is small. Watering a plant, picking up a book you didn't plan to read, texting someone just to say, "I'm here." That's the new engine starting. Not from "I should," but from "I want to honor this." Because here's the truth no one says out loud. Your new life won't start with clarity. It will start with curiosity. You don't need a 10-step plan. You need to follow the thread. The thing that feels honest. The thing that makes your chest expand, even a little. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's alignment. Not perfection. Not performance. Just presence in truth. And when you live that way, even in small ways, motivation doesn't need to be summoned. It shows up on its own. Because now, you're not acting to impress. You're acting to express. And that's the game changer. You might still feel tired. You might still feel unclear. But underneath that fog, something solid is growing. A sense of direction that doesn't come from logic. It comes from coherence. Your outer life starts to match your inner life. Your yes means yes. Your no means no. You stop showing up where you don't belong. You stop apologizing for needing silence. You start moving toward what feels real, even if no one claps. And here's the unexpected twist. That kind of energy gets more done than any to-do list ever could, because it's not leaking. It's not performative. It's aligned. And alignment is sustainable. It's not about being constantly motivated. It's about being unshakably honest about what your life is trying to become through you. So if you're waiting to feel like your old self again, don't. That self is gone, but a deeper one is waking up. One that doesn't chase. One that doesn't burn out. One that simply knows. And that's not the end. That's the real beginning. Now let's make it tangible. Let's get practical about how to feed this kind of fuel in everyday life, through symbolic action, grounded routines, and stoic clarity. So, now that you've begun to feel this new kind of motivation, how do you live from it? How do you feed it, protect it, Grow it without slipping back into ego games or spiritual detachment. Carl Jung offered a path. He called it the symbolic life. Living not through routines imposed by others, but through acts of meaning that emerge from within. He wrote, "The symbolic life is the only life worth living." But what does that mean, practically? It means this. You start paying attention to the subtle pulls, the small urges that don't make sense to your schedule but make sense to your soul. You let go of perfection and instead ask, what's quietly calling me today? Maybe it's writing one honest page in your journal. Maybe it's canceling a meeting you agreed to out of guilt. Maybe it's walking alone without your phone, just to listen. This isn't about achieving more. It's about reconnecting with the part of you that tells the truth even when no one else is listening. So here are 3 grounded practices, Stoic in nature, Jungian in depth, to begin living symbolically right now. 1. Morning inventory, the 3-minute alignment scan. Each morning, ask yourself, what truth wants to be lived through me today? What do I need to let go of to make room for it? What action, however small, would honor that? You don't need to answer with clarity. You just need to be willing to ask. The Stoics believed in rehearsing the day ahead, not to control it, but to orient your choices around what matters. 2. Negative visualization, the quiet catalyst. Seneca called it premeditatio malorum, imagining the loss of what you love, not to depress you, but to awaken you. Close your eyes. Imagine losing the things you take for granted. Your voice, your hands, your morning coffee, a loved one's presence. Then open your eyes and notice the fire returning. Gratitude doesn't need fireworks. It needs contrast. This practice reconnects you to presensino as a concept, but as urgency without panic. 3. Symbolic action, the smallest honest move. Every day, choose one act that isn't logical, but is deeply true. Wear the outfit that feels like you. Decline an invitation that drains you. Rearrange your desk so it reflects your next chapter, not your past identity. These are small things, but they matter, because your psyche reads them as proof that you're listening. And when you live this way, motivation becomes a byproduct, not a chore. You stop waiting to feel ready. You start responding to what's real. And that's how transformation actually happens. Not in a flash, but in 1,000 small symbolic agreements between who you've been and who you're becoming. This is the new structure. Not a to-do list, but a truth list. A quiet discipline that Stoicism has taught for centuries. Act according to nature, speak according to reason, live according to your soul. And yes, you'll still have days when the fog returns, when motivation feels far. That's okay, because now you're not relying on motivation to move. You're relying on meaning. And meaning, unlike adrenaline, never burns out. So if you need a compass, here it is. What feels honest? What honors yourself? What keeps you real? That's your practice. That's your path. And now, you're walking it. Let's bring it full circle. Because this isn't just about awakening anymore. It's about becoming. Let's go back to the beginning, to that feeling you couldn't name. The emptiness, the stillness, the eerie silence that followed your awakening. You thought something was wrong. You thought your fire had died. But now, maybe, you see it differently. You didn't lose your fire. The old fire burned down so a deeper one could begin. That first fire was survival. It came from expectation, fear, performance. It helped you run fast, but it never helped you rest. This new fire, it doesn't roar. It doesn't beg to be seen. It glows, quietly, steadily, from the inside out. Carl Jung didn't offer a formula. He offered something far more powerful, an invitation to individuation, to walk the path where the self emerges not from escape, but from integration, not by erasing the ego, but by aligning it with soul. And that's what you've begun. You're no longer chasing meaning. You're becoming the kind of person who creates it, not through grand gestures, but through honest choices, not by climbing ladders, but by building roots. This is the real motivation, not adrenaline, but alignment, not hype, but harmony. And yes, there will still be days when it feels unclear, when the fog returns, when the ego tries to grab the wheel again. That's okay. You're not aiming for perfection. You're practicing coherence. Because when your life matches your values, when your choices echo your truth, you no longer need to chase purpose. You become it. So if today you still feel a little heavy, a little unsure, that's part of it. Don't rush the forming. Don't panic in the pause. Don't mistake becoming for being broken. Because the truth is, you're not lost. You're becoming. And the person you're becoming, they don't need applause. They don't need clarity on day one. They just need space, stillness, and a quiet kind of courage that says, I will honor what's real, even if no one else understands it yet. That is strength. That is soul. And if you've made it this far, if these words feel like home, if something inside you is nodding quietly, then you're already walking the path. This isn't the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming. If this helped name something you've been feeling in silence, drop a comment below. And if you're ready to rebuild from the inside out, hit subscribe. We walk this road together.